You were not born to win. You were born to serve the will, to chase without rest, to strive without reward, to believe in victory while being fed defeat. The world dangled success in front of you like a prize, but it was never yours to claim. It was bait, a distraction, a lie woven into the structure of your existence. Because if you saw the game for what it was, you would stop playing. And they cannot afford that. So they dress the cage. They give it names: ambition, opportunity, freedom. They tell you hard work wins, that the system is fair, that life is a ladder and the climb is noble. But the ladder is rigged, the climb is endless, and the summit is always just out of reach. Because you were never meant to arrive. You were meant to hope, to sweat for another man's dream, to worship success while dying of exhaustion. And when you finally collapse, empty, confused, forgotten, they say, he gave it his all. They call it honor, but it is theft. You were robbed of time, of clarity, of the brief, precious moments when you could have lived for yourself. And this is the cruelest part. They made you believe it was your fault, that you didn't try hard enough, that others simply wanted it more. But the truth is colder. You were never meant to win. You were meant to perform, to consume, to obey. And now finally you begin to see the design. You were taught to believe in effort, to wake early, to grind, to stay humble, to give more. And you did. You gave your strength, your time, your youth, all in the belief that merit would be met with reward. But it wasn't. You watched others rise, not through virtue but through vanity. You saw the lazy succeed. You saw the cruel prosper. You saw the shallow celebrated, and still you blamed yourself. Because the system told you to. It said, try harder. It said, you're not thinking big enough. It said, success leaves clues. But what it didn't say, what it couldn't admit, was this. The game is fixed. You weren't meant to win. You were meant to keep the machine alive. You were the labor, the fuel, the silent force behind someone else's wealth. And the moment you questioned the game, you were labeled bitter, negative, a failure. Not because you were wrong, but because you were dangerous. Because nothing terrifies the world more than a man who no longer believes. A man who sees through the script. A man who understands that winning, in their terms, means losing yourself. And you? You're done losing. Not because you've given up, but because you've woken up. Look around. Those who win are not wise. They are willing. Willing to bend. Willing to flatter. Willing to trade authenticity for approval. They wear masks so well they forget their own faces. You, on the other hand, stayed real. And that was your crime. You spoke when silence was profitable. You stood still when the crowd ran. You questioned what others posted, and so you were left behind. Not because you were wrong, but because truth is too heavy for those trained to fly with fiction. You see them now in the cars, on the screens, behind the podiums, but you no longer envy them, because you know what they paid. Their silence, their soul, their sleep. They won, yes, but what did they become? Parrots, puppets, performers in a circus that rewards conformity. And the cost of refusal? Obscurity, but obscurity is not exile, it is sanctuary. It is the place where thinkers dwell, where truth survives, where men like you begin to see clearly without distortion. You were never meant to win. You were meant to wake. And in that waking, you have already done what the victors fear most. You've escaped their game. They raised you to chase a dream, but it wasn't your dream. It was theirs. And worse, it was rigged. It promised you meaning through labor, dignity through obedience, joy through approval. And you believed it, not because you were weak, but because you were good, because you trusted the voices that told you the world was fair. But the world is not fair. The world is efficient. It does not care about truth. It cares about productivity. And it does not nurture the wise. It exploits the willing. And so from the moment you could speak, they trained you not to ask, but to accept, to memorize, to submit, to believe. And when that belief collapsed, they told you to try again. Not because there was hope, but because hope keeps you docile. Now you see. Now you understand why the wise are broken before they bloom. Why the philosophers starve while the liars prosper. Because truth is slow. And the world rewards speed, because truth is solitary, and the world rewards spectacle, because truth is expensive, and the world rewards whatever is cheap enough to sell. You were never meant to win. You were meant to build the platform others would stand on. But here's the turn. Now that you know the rules, you no longer play. Now you stand apart, not bitter, but awake. You see it everywhere now. The way mediocrity is celebrated, the way loudness is mistaken for confidence, the way obedience is repackaged as ambition. And beneath it all, the quiet men, the thinking men, are discarded like relics. They say, "You're too intense." They say, "You think too much." They say, "You need to learn how to play the game." But you don't want to play. You want to live. You want meaning, not medals. You want silence that speaks, not noise that sells. And so they call you bitter. They say you're jealous of the winners, but you are not jealous. You are exhausted. Exhausted by the fraud, exhausted by the smiles, exhausted by the world's endless ability to reward the hollow and punish the whole. You tried to be part of it, and it nearly killed you. Not your body, but your soul. The soul that once lit up when you asked why. The soul that once believed the world had space for depth. Now you walk differently. You do not sell yourself. You do not seek their spotlight. You build in silence. You speak when it matters. You no longer perform, and they will forget your name. But you will not forget yourself. You were never meant to win their game, but you were always meant to outgrow it. And they told you to compete. They never told you the race was fixed. From birth, you were measured, ranked, compared. Grades, awards, promotions, and every achievement dangled like a carrot, every failure used like a whip. But no one asked what it cost you. No one asked who you became in the chase. They only praised the performance and punished the pause. And when you stopped running, they vanished, because you were no longer useful. You were no longer a story they could sell, no longer an example to parade, no longer a product of the machine. Now you stand still, and in that stillness you feel something terrifying. Yourself, without the titles and without the tasks, without the noise. And it is in that silence that truth returns. The truth that this world was not built for the wise. It was built for the obedient. It rewards the repeaters, the flatterers, the ones who speak first, even if they speak wrong. And it leaves behind those who listen, those who think, those who walk alone, not because they are lost, but because they refuse to follow the blind. You were never meant to win, because winning in their world means losing your soul, and yours finally is intact. They trained you to chase approval, not truth. They gave you scripts, told you what success should look like, what happiness should sound like, what life should cost. And like a good student, you obeyed. You played the part, smiled on cue, posted your progress, hid your pain. And still you were not chosen. Still it was not enough, because it was never meant to be. You were not being prepared for greatness. You were being programmed for compliance. And every step forward was not a victory. It was a leash, until something broke. Not outside you, but within. A fracture in the belief that one more effort would redeem you, and in that fracture you found something rare. Your own mind. No longer hypnotized by promises, no longer motivated by fear. You stopped chasing the trophy because you finally understood it was plastic. You stopped seeking the crown because you saw the throne was built on sand and you were never meant to win. Because winning was the word they used to keep you from asking what the game was for. But now you ask, and in that question, you begin to live. They call it progress. But progress for whom? The wise man sees factories of followers, not leaders. Movements without meaning, technology without thought. They gave you screens but took your attention. They gave you choices but controlled the outcomes. They gave you connection but removed intimacy. And all the while they told you this is what winning looks like. But you don't feel like you're winning. You feel like you're drowning. In noise, in schedules, and in obligations that serve no truth. You ask yourself, is this life? And the answer is yes, but not your life. The one you were sold. The one that turns men into machines. The one that confuses busyness with worth. You see now that the prize was poisoned. that what they called status was just camouflage for slavery. And so you step back, not to quit, but to question, not to give up, but to remember. Remember who you were before they convinced you to become someone else. You were never meant to win their race, because you were never meant to run in circles. You were meant to walk, alone if you must, towards something real. And now, at last you do. You don't envy them anymore, the winners. The ones who smile on stages, who collect trophies, who speak in empty phrases that somehow move the masses. You see it now, the hollowness behind their eyes, the exhaustion beneath the polish, the quiet panic of those who know they must keep performing or be forgotten. Because that's the trap. Once you win in their world, you can never stop. You can't rest, you can't question, you can't change. You must keep proving, keep pleasing, keep pretending that the game still matters. But it doesn't. It never did. And your greatest rebellion? You stopped playing. You stopped needing the applause. You stopped needing to be seen. Because the only thing worth seeing, the only thing that cannot be taken, is your own clarity. And clarity does not compete. It does not chase, and it does not sell, and it stands. Unshaken. You were never meant to win their war. But you've already won something far greater. The right to live your truth, without permission, without reward, and without regret. You learned something priceless. That silence is strength, not the silence of fear, but the silence of men who no longer argue with lies. You used to explain yourself. You used to defend your doubts, soften your wisdom, dilute your clarity so it wouldn't offend. No more. Now you let them talk. You let them laugh, judge, win. Because you see their game and you no longer need to stop it. You only need to not play. Let them chase. Let them post. Let them build kingdoms out of sand. You are not here to win their approval. You are here to remember who you were before the noise. And in that remembering, something shifts. The pressure lifts. The fog clears. And the voice that's been buried for decades finally speaks. You were never broken. You were betrayed. Betrayed by systems, by narratives, by rewards that turned you into a servant of someone else's dream. But now the dream is over. You wake, not to fight the world, but to leave it behind. And that finally is victory, and they gave you idols to worship, not thinkers, not builders, but performers. People whose gift was spectacle, not substance. They said, look at them. Look how happy, look how rich, look how powerful. But they never said, look how real, because reality doesn't sell. And the truth? The truth is too quiet for the stage. It doesn't sparkle, it doesn't shout, it doesn't bend to keep you entertained. And so it gets buried under celebrity, under algorithms, under the endless scroll of curated lives that say, this is what winning looks like. But you've stopped scrolling. You've stopped idolizing. You've stopped pretending that admiration is the same as aspiration. Because you no longer want their life. You want your own. Raw, unfiltered, unguarded, built in silence, paid for in solitude, protected by the wisdom you bled for. You were never meant to win their game. Because you were never meant to become someone else. You were meant to return to who you were before the world convinced you to disappear. You were raised to endure, but not to awaken. They taught you to tolerate boredom, pressure, failure, but not to question the rules. Be strong, they said. But strength in their world meant silence. It meant obeying without understanding. It meant staying in line when the line led nowhere. Now you understand the difference between endurance and enslavement, between resilience and resignation, between discipline and delusion. You stayed too long. You worked too hard. You gave too much to a system that never knew your name. And when you broke, they called it weakness. But that break, that collapse was birth. The end of pretending, the start of seeing. You no longer carry the weight they gave you. You carry your own now, a smaller weight, but heavier with truth. Because now you know, you were never meant to win their prize. You were meant to see it for what it is. And in that vision, in that refusal to keep pretending, you become something they will never be. Free. You don't explain anymore. You don't justify your distance, your silence, your refusal to play because you've seen what the game does. It hollows men. It teaches them to smile while dying inside, to work for applause while starving for meaning, to sacrifice time for trinkets, love for leverage, freedom for validation. And when they've given everything, the world gives them a plaque, a line in a eulogy, a son who never knew them, and you said no, not loudly and just finally. No to the ladder that goes nowhere, no to the prize that costs your soul. No to the illusion that you'll be loved for who you are, if you first become who they want. You walk now not toward success, but away from sacrifice, away from systems that reward the shallow, away from a life that fits but does not feel. You were never meant to win, but you were meant to see. And once you see, you stop running and start becoming. They'll call you cynical. They'll say you gave up. But they're wrong. You didn't give up. You gave back what was never yours. The dream they handed you, the path they drew in permanent ink, the life that looked like freedom but felt like prison, and you returned it. And they couldn't understand, because they still believe in the system that broke you, still worship the fame that feeds on emptiness, still chase the numbers, the likes, the titles, but you're done chasing. Now you create your own pace, your own measure, your own values, written not in ambition but in clarity. You live slower now, but every step is yours, every breath unbranded, every decision unpurchased, and this is not failure, this is exit, this is emancipation from the noise. You were never meant to win the crowd, you were meant to see through it. And in seeing, begin. They taught you to fear being forgotten, to chase relevance, to stay visible, to always be building something they can measure. But the wise man knows relevance is a trap. What they call relevance is just repetition. The same ideas, the same poses, the same cycle of noise pretending to be new. You don't want relevance. You want resonance. You want something that doesn't fade when the algorithm changes, something that cannot be bought, repackaged, or sold at scale. And that cannot be found on their path. Their path is crowded and lonely, full of people who say yes but have no idea what they want, full of people who smile to survive. You left that path, not because it was too hard, because it was too hollow, and you chose depth over attention, substance over recognition, silence over the roar of false applause. They will say you disappeared, but you didn't disappear. You reappeared where it mattered, inside your own life, your own mind, your own meaning. You were never meant to win their world. You were meant to leave it. You stopped apologizing for being quiet, for being slow to trust, for not wanting to play the game everyone else pretends to enjoy. You used to think something was wrong with you. Why didn't the prizes excite you? Why did the parties feel hollow? Why did success make you feel more like a product than a person? And then you saw it. The others felt it too. They just hid it better. They numbed it with consumption, dulled it with distractions, but you couldn't. Your soul was too loud, too stubborn, too unwilling to accept a life that only looked good from a distance. So you left the noise. And what you found was not emptiness, but clarity. Not despair, but direction. Not weakness, but a different kind of strength. The strength to stop proving. The strength to say no. The strength to choose yourself without needing an audience to approve. You were never meant to win their affection. You were meant to reclaim your attention. And now that you have, it belongs to no one else. You remember now, not who they told you to be, but who you were before the world intervened, before the curriculum, before the career plan, and before the dream became a spreadsheet. You remember the boy who asked why, not how fast. You remember the silence that wasn't empty but sacred. And in that remembering, something returns. Your time. Not just the hours, but the ownership. Because they didn't just take your time, they colonized it. Turned your minutes into money, your focus into currency, your energy into inventory. And you agreed, because you thought agreement was maturity, but now you withdraw your consent. You revoke your subscription to a life that costs your essence. You walk away, not bitter but intact. Because the great secret of awakening is this: you don't need to burn it all down. You just need to stop feeding it. You were never meant to win their race. You were meant to walk your path with no map, no applause, and no regrets. They won't understand. They'll say you gave up. They'll say you could have been something. But you are something. Something they can't measure. You are no longer a product, no longer a project, no longer a puppet moved by validation. You are no longer motivated by the fear of being left behind. You welcome solitude now, not as punishment but as purification. Because in solitude there's no one left to impress, and no competition, no race, just breathe and being, and the quiet return to what matters. You wake up slower now. You eat in silence. You take walks that go nowhere. And it is here in this nowhere that you find everything: presence, peace, power. Not the power they praise, and not domination, but sovereignty. The ability to live unpurchased. The ability to choose what the world forgot long ago. Stillness, attention. Enough. You were never meant to win the war for attention. You were meant to escape it entirely, and now, finally, you have. You know now, not all exits are failures, and sometimes the wisest move is walking away. Not to escape, but to protect what's left. Your time, your integrity, your sanity. You no longer fight battles just because they're popular. You no longer chase goals just because they're visible. You choose your life with care. You no longer strive, you select, because striving is endless. It feeds on lack. But choosing? Choosing is power, and it says this is enough. And in a world built on more, enough is revolution. They still run, still grind, still confuse motion with meaning. But you've slowed down. You've gone quiet. You've stopped applauding performances because your applause belongs to truth now, and truth is not loud, not quick, not marketable, but it's yours, and that makes you dangerous to everything they built. You were never meant to win their game, but you were always meant to show others how to leave it. You've lost the desire to be understood because you've realized most people don't want truth. They want comfort. They want to hear what they already believe, just louder. And when you offer them something deeper, they flinch, because depth demands change, and change terrifies those who've built their identity on noise, and so you stop explaining, not out of pride, but because you've outgrown the need. Your life is no longer a pitch. Your choices are not requests for permission. You live like a man who owns time, not because you have more of it, but because you finally know what it's worth. You spend it slowly, on silence, on solitude, on spaces that don't demand a mask. And what have you lost? The applause, the momentum, the spotlight. And what have you gained? Everything that matters. You were never meant to win their race. You were meant to remember the pace of your own soul. And you've remembered it, step by step, breath by breath, word by honest word. They asked why you stopped trying. You didn't. You just stopped trying to win at something you never believed in. You stopped bending your values to fit in. You stopped measuring your worth in outcomes. You stopped showing up just to be counted. And in that stillness, you saw it all. The fraud, the fatigue, the fixation on symbols that meant nothing to you. You weren't lazy. You were done pretending, done performing for a scoreboard that erased your name even when you played well. They call it quitting. You call it clarity. They call it failure. You call it freedom. Because the moment you stopped competing, you started creating. Not for them. For you, quietly, slowly, without applause. And that creation, simple, small, yours, is more than they'll ever know, because they're still waiting to be told they matter. You no longer wait, you already do. You were never meant to win their game, but you've already won something better. A life you don't need to escape from. You're no longer afraid of being forgotten, because what you're building doesn't need to be remembered. It only needs to be real. You've stopped chasing legacy. You've stopped trying to carve your name into the memory of strangers. Instead, you leave fingerprints on the lives you touch quietly, on the moments you show up fully, on the days you choose presence over performance. The world won't give you a medal for that. There's no prize for inner peace, and no trophy for truth, no standing ovation for simplicity. But that's the point. You've stopped needing rewards. You've stopped needing to prove that your life matters, and it matters because you live it, because you refuse to outsource it, because you no longer need anyone to agree. You were never meant to win in their way. You were meant to live in yours. And the more you do, the less you need from the world that once held you hostage. This isn't retreat. It's return to what you knew all along before the world told you to forget. You don't crave the spotlight anymore. You've seen what it does and how it blinds, how it burns, how it turns even truth into theater. You've seen men lose their soul for a moment of recognition. You've watched sincerity dissolve into performance. And you said, not me, not this time. You've chosen the shadows now, not out of fear, but because you see clearer here. You found power in invisibility and freedom in being underestimated, peace in not needing to be known. Because what you're building isn't fragile. It doesn't need applause and it doesn't need defense. It simply is. Sturdy, silent, and sufficient. You were never meant to win the popularity contest. You were meant to leave it, and in leaving it, you find what the crowd never will. Yourself. There's a reason they don't teach you to rest. Because rest reveals what noise hides, and once you rest, once you stop, once you listen, you start to ask questions they can't answer. You ask, why do I need to be busy to be worthy? Why do I fear stillness? Why do I call exhaustion a virtue? And then you see it. The machine runs on your restlessness, your self-doubt, your desperation to matter. It sells you the cure to the disease it gave you. But now you see the cycle, and you step out. You trade busyness for presence. You stop filling every moment. You allow emptiness and find it isn't empty at all. It's full of you. Not the version they dressed up, the one you buried to survive. You were never meant to win their hustle. You were meant to remember your name. And now you wear it, not as a brand but as a home. You've stopped seeking shortcuts, and not because you enjoy the long road, but because the long road is real. There is no shortcut to wisdom, and no hack for integrity, and no cheat code for peace. You earn those things not by climbing faster, but by standing still long enough to see what truly matters. Most people don't see it. They're too busy building ladders to nowhere, too busy optimizing lives they don't enjoy. But you've slowed down. You've sat with the ache. You've faced the questions. You've mourned the versions of yourself you had to kill to stay alive. And in that mourning, you were reborn, not as someone new, as someone true. You were never meant to win by their rules. You were meant to break them quietly, completely, without apology. And in that breaking, you became whole. The wisest men don't stand on stages. They sit in silence. Not because they have nothing to say, but because the world no longer listens. It rewards the loudest, not the truest. The most visible, not the most virtuous. And so the wise learn to speak in whispers, to those who are still awake. You've become one of them, not bitter, not broken, and just done pretending. You look around and see actors calling themselves leaders, salesmen selling meaning, and you refuse the script. You refuse the trade. You won't sell your peace for attention, and you won't trade your time for approval. You've stopped trying to fix the world. Now you build your own, smaller, quieter, yours. You were never meant to lead the masses. You were meant to lead yourself. And in doing so, you offer something rare, an example that doesn't demand followers, only permission to be real. There's no blueprint now, no step-by-step, and no guru to follow, no system to trust. Just instinct, just experience, just the quiet conviction that your life is yours again. And that is more than enough, because now, for the first time, you don't wake with dread. You don't move out of fear. You don't ask the world for permission to breathe. You walk, not toward success, but toward truth. And truth is not a destination. It's a decision. To stop lying to yourself, to stop chasing what doesn't matter, to stop calling survival progress. You no longer need the trophy. You no longer need the crown. You have something better, self-respect, and the clarity to never sell it again. You were never meant to win. You were meant to see. And now, finally, you do.